Welcome to my ranged gearing progression guide. Before I begin, I want to start the video with a few disclaimers. First, I'm assuming you're a member playing a main account with access to the Grand Exchange, so some of the advice may not apply to Iron Mode accounts. Grand Exchange prices are also very volatile, so the costs and recommendations might change over time. Second, this guide is based on how I feel I would progress using ranged as my primary combat style. I am not considering progression for the other combat styles. It may not be the most optimal route, but I'll try to keep the recommendations as flexible as possible. Third, there are many important utility logs like archaeology relics, ancient curses, familiars, disruption shield, darkness, and more. I won't be covering those here and will instead assume you'll unlock them naturally throughout your progression. This guide focuses specifically on ranged progression. Last but not least, I've made dedicated videos covering many of the ranged specific topics that will be mentioned in this guide. If you'd like any more details on them, you'll find the links in the description below. Starting with the early game, I recommend completing the Blood Pack quest and you will get your first ranged weapon, Chaos Charge Bow. Then level up to level 5 ranged, and I recommend going to Port Serum and talking to Goodrick to get yourself a set of Pathfinder gear with quick bow and a bunch of goodies that will help start your journey. I would suggest to get yourself an Airstorm Drape that will boost your range damage, which is a drop from a Troll Shaman, or buy it from the Grand Exchange. Once you reach level 10 ranged and 10 defense, you can upgrade your gear to use hard leather armor, which you can buy from the range store at Baroque, or just make them yourselves, and buy yourself an oak longbow with iron arrows. Once you reach level 20 range and 20 defense, you can get yourself the next upgrade, Willow longbow with steel arrows, and for the armor, studded leather armor will suffice. You can buy it from the same shop. Once you reach level 30 range and defense, because Jagex decided there's no bows for level 30, you will have to switch to mithril crossbows with mithril bolts instead, or stick with willow weapons. For armor, Carapace armor is a solid choice which you can buy from the same Varrock shop. At some point, if you can afford it, buy yourself an amulet of power and a ring of wealth. If you're not a member, you may find Explorer's Ring to be an alternative ring substitute. At level 40 range and defense, you can then switch back to Maple Longbow with adamant arrows, and Green Dragonhide armor will work as your armor. You can buy it from the same Varrock shop. At level 50 ranged and defense, you can upgrade your weapon to Acadia Longbow with rune arrows. For armor, I would actually recommend your first ranged power armor, Spined armor. This will require the Frenetic Trials quest. Otherwise, if you don't got the quest or if you're a free-to-play player, then you'll go for Blue Dragonhide armor instead, which you can buy from the Grand Exchange. Turaf boots is free to play, so you can also replace the boots with Turaf boots instead. At this point, if you invested quite a bit in dungeoneering, you can upgrade your necklace to the Far Sight Snapshot necklace. Spirit Cape is also an upgrade to your current cape, and purchasing it also unlocks a passive that reduces your familiar special ability points usage. At level 60 ranged and defense, because Jagex decided there's no tier 60 bows, you can consider upgrading to Orichalcum crossbows or Demon Slayer crossbows with Orichalcum bolts. You can upgrade your armor to Demon Slayer armor or just stick with Spined if you can't afford it. An honorable mention does go to Graphite Charge Bow, which is a level 55 charge bow that doesn't require ammo. From this point onward, this is as far as you can get for free-to-play players. At level 70 range and defense, you can either go for Year Longbow or upgrade to Crystal Bow, which will require roving elves and 50 agility. If you choose the path of Crystal Bow, you don't need ammo. If you choose the path of Yew Longbow, you will need Necronium arrows. For armor, you can technically go for the superior spine armor too. Back in the day, I did have trouble obtaining that from the Grand Exchange, so unsure about how it is now. The cape can also be replaced with Ava's Alerter from the Do No Evil quest, but for now, I'll stick with Spirit Cape because this was post-editing and I completely forgot about the Ava's Alerter as a cape. From this point and on, the gap between your GP pouch and your skill levels will start to get bigger. I'm going to consider this the end of the early game progression. The progression here starts becoming foggy because all of it depends on your account skill levels, quest completion, and wealth. You may continue using the wooden bows until the final wood tier, or even branch off to chinchompas and metal crossbows for AoE training, or you may be starting to think about preparing gear for early game bossing, so you will start thinking about taking the path of augmented weapons. With this assumption, let's assume you have reached level 99 range and defense with your defense skill cape equipped. Let's say your gear is in the same state, full Demon Slayer with Crystal Bow. Let's get this upgraded. Let's upgrade the weapons first. You can either go for Decimation, a tier 87 charge bow, which can be quite expensive but has a solid AoE special attack, or you can go for Internal Magic Bow MK5, which is a tier 90 accuracy bow that is dirt cheap. You may have heard that a tier 90 weapon that cannot be augmented is supposed to do less damage than a tier 80 weapon that can be perked with low tier perks. Upon testing this on a dummy, this is not true. I would personally stick with Internal Magic Bow MK5 unless you're looking to train Invention, then go with Decimation if you can afford it. For ammo, if you want to be cheap, splintering arrows or just jump straight into full arrows. For armor, the armor progression for RuneScape is backwards. Ceramic, a tier 90 ranged power armor set, is superior to the more expensive tier 70 armored armor set. It, however, does not have a boots or gloves. I would augment it, and I'll talk about the invention perks later. For the necklace slot, buy a Seren Murmur, which is very cheap, and then spend 100k in Dungeoneering tokens to buy a Chaotic Remnant to make the Farsight necklace, and then buy a Bloodshard necklace to give it a lifesteal effect to turn it into the Farsight Blood necklace. This does require 80 crafting. This is superior to Amulet of Souls in accuracy and damage, especially with the blood effect applying multiple times on multiple hit splats. For boots, Fleety boots are a solid cheap choice to purchase as tier 80 power boots. For gloves, if you want to cheap out, you can go for tier 90 Ascension grips, but they do degrade to dust so you can't really sell it back. Alternative options like Nightmare Gauntlets, which is tier 85, can work as well. Or if the G price is accurate, you can also go for Draglich Fan Braces. For now, I'll just use Ascension grips. If you're planning on doing bosses that can be poisoned, you can consider Cinder Beans, but the price of these gloves are very volatile. For the ring slot, if you have quests completed, 6H Circuit is an option, or if you have guts, a Siam Surgeon's ring would work. Or if you just want a camper ring, Ring of Vigor from Daemonheim is another solid choice, but it is usually best used as a switch until you unlock it as a passive from Extinction. I'll assume you got Guts and got the Siam Surgeon's ring, and you are willing to switch to the Ring of Vigor. For potions, extreme ranging potions and extreme defense potions will do for now. I would not recommend overloads this early in your progression, since I always found the difference is not that big early on. If you haven't already, make sure you have unlocked Death Swiftness from completing the World Wakes quest and Shadow Tendrils from completing the Dig Site quest. If you still have your Crystal Bow, you can turn that into a Planted Feet switch, which boosts your Death Swiftness duration by 7 seconds by simply switching to it. When you have 100% adrenaline, you will switch to it, use Death Swiftness, and then switch back to your main bow. For pocket slots, you can start with either Scripture of Jazz or Scripture of Wind, for these are very cheap early game options that will do well. Scripture of Jazz will last you much longer in your progression, so I would personally use Jazz. Wind is good for more AoE situations. I will now consider this the end of the mid-game progression, and from here, I will begin the journey to the end-game progression. Depending on the point of your progression with Invention, I would recommend the listed perks on screen. They don't need to be min-maxed, low-level perks would do fine. I also recommend unlocking Death Spores to use as a switch for free Death Swiftness. This may sound insane, but the first thing I highly recommend is getting your Zuck Cape. All you need to do is to survive one kill without teleporting. Take your sweet time, put food in mouth, bring an entire mammoth, take it very slow if you must. One kill is all you need. Next, or if you are struggling with Zuck, then I may recommend obtaining the Greater Ricochet Ability Codex. This ability enhances its synergy with Imbue Shadow by a huge margin. Next, I recommend upgrading your ring slot by replacing your ring with the Stalker's ring all at once. First, obtain the ring which requires 10 archer rings and a Heart of the Archer, and then buy the Enchantment of Shadows to enchant it. You can also obtain the Pernix Quiver to put in your ammo slot. With the quiver, you should seriously start thinking about using other arrows like Wen, Bic, and Jazz Dragon Beads. See my arrow guide for a guide on that. Now finally, I highly recommend getting your weapon upgraded. Seren Godbow is what I would highly recommend you try to obtain first. Once you've obtained that, if you want to obtain the best in slot perks, you can attempt it, but you can also cheap out on it if you want. By now, you should at least be using regular overloads and slowly work your way to auto overloads or jump straight into auto overloads right away. For armor, I recommend going for the full regular Draglich set. Attempt as much as you can to get the highest level perks. I do have an endgame range perk guide if you're interested. You can still choose to cheap out, but keep this in mind for later. At this point, you can either choose to keep using Jazz Scripture, or you can switch to either Foe or a Masket Scripture. This all depends on your comfort zone. You can go with a Masket book if you don't like the extra damage taken from Foe. For now, I'll just use the Masket book, but keep Foe book as an option. Then you can finally think about obtaining the Bow of the Last Guardian. Move your perks to the Bow of the Last Guardian. Since this comes from the same boss, you can also fit in greater Death Swiftness in the process, especially if you were hunting it down yourself. Then you can finally get rid of the Planted Fleet switch. Now I would start recommending investing in Essence of Finality to put the Seren Godbow spec in it, and then another one to put Decimation in it. If you did do lots of AoE content before, you may consider obtaining this as a first EOF much earlier in your progression. Then I recommend upgrading your Draglich armor. When you're doing it, make sure you have at least 4 or 5 scales before upgrading, or you will break apart the Draglich set effect. Or you can take the path of Equilibrium Masterwork armor with the Ring of Retribution instead. But I highly recommend going for Draglich first because you likely already invested in the biting perks. Heading towards the path of Masterwork armor would at least be over 1 bill in investment. Staying on the Elite Draglich path, invest in another EOF to put an Eldritch crossbow in it, and then finally another EOF to put Gloomfire bow in it. You can wrap up your progression with obtaining the Praisal Codex for the Desolation Curse, Corruption Shot for whatever you want to do with it, Dragon Slayer and Undead Slayer abilities, and then finally a Shard of Genesis for the Bow of the Last Guardian. And that should wrap up my range gear progression guide. I hope at least some of it is helpful. You don't have to fully follow all of them exactly the way I laid it out. Figure out what works best for you. I simply gave you what I felt I would have done if I was starting over from scratch all over again. If you have any questions or any alternative suggestions, feel free to let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching, subscribe if you enjoyed, and bye bye.